All right, everyone. So the Polish craze and enthusiasm and the honeymoon period is now over. I've said this before. We're seeing this right now in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria. For a while, we were hearing about how we needed to help Ukraine, and all of these European countries were going to stand together in solidarity for Ukraine. And now we are seeing the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, saying that Polish farmers come first, because all of the Ukrainian agricultural products that were being imported into Poland were bringing down the prices of produce. And they were making it more difficult for Polish farmers to make an income. And so Polish farmers started protesting, and they started saying, stop bringing in Ukrainian goods. And now the Poles have stopped importing Ukrainian goods. Not only the Poles, the Slovakians, the Hungarians, and now the Bulgarians are getting very close to also implementing a ban on importing Ukrainian agricultural products. So what's happening? The honeymoon period for Ukraine is over. In fact, they did a recent poll in Slovakia, and the majority of the Slovaks who answered the poll said that they hope that Russia wins the war. So much for solidarity. And what's so funny is that Hungary has become almost like the black sheep of Europe, and now you have 15 EU countries doing a class action lawsuit against Hungary for a supposed homophobic law that the Hungarians have been enacting. I'm guessing it's against homosexual propaganda. So the Europeans are not united. They're not united. They are not in unity for Ukraine. They're not even unified in values. This whole idea of an EU that's perfectly united, it's a chimera. It doesn't exist. And I think that in the future, conflict is eventually going to break out in the continent. I know it's kind of a far-fetched thing to say, or at least it's perceived as a far-fetched thing to say, but the reality is that Europe has a very long history of wars. And I don't need to be a professor to know this. Europe has a very long history of wars, and so for me to say that conflict will break out eventually in Europe is not really far-fetched, and it's not adventuresome or crazy or anything like that. I think eventually a war will break out in Europe, and it's going to be like something from World War I and World War II. I would not be surprised if one day Germany goes to war against Poland, and let's not forget that in the 1990s, which was within our own lifetimes, the Chancellor of Germany back in the 1990s, Helmut Kohl, refused to recognize the borders of Poland that were established by the Allies after the Second World War. So this whole idea of, well, Europe has changed. It's like saying, some guy who has a huge criminal record is now a changed man because he just says he's a changed man. But if you look at what he says, if you look at his attitude, if you look at his actions, it reflects that not much has changed. Not really a whole lot has changed. And you can see the tension brewing between Germany and Poland. There's this tension between the European Union and Poland over Poland's judicial policy, over Poland's stance against Sodom, over Poland's stance against abortion. It's brewing. The hatred is brewing. All of that old anger that's been suppressed since the end of the Second World War, it's all going to blow up. It's all going to come out. And another interesting thing, because I'm pretty certain there were people who were thinking that this war in Ukraine was going to end soon and all that. This war is not going to end soon. The reason is because Russia has to take all of Ukraine. Russia has to take all of Ukraine. Russia will not be satisfied with just taking Donbass. Because if Russia just takes Donbass, just takes Luhansk and Donetsk, it's still going to have to deal with NATO arming and training proxies like Azov, like Nazis, like crazy Ukrainian nationalists in the rest of Ukraine that wouldn't be under the control of Russia. And Russia would still have to deal with those insurgents, those NATO-backed, America, German-backed insurgents, UK-backed insurgents. So in order to make a buffer against NATO, it's going to have to just take over all of Ukraine and make it very clear to NATO that Ukraine will not be a part of NATO. It's not going to be in the fold of America's empire. A deputy of the Russian Duma, his name is Andrei Gorolyov. What, I can't say these names. It's like Polish last names. Mr. Gorolyov stated recently, just a few days ago, that more than likely this war is going to end at around 2027 to 2030, somewhere around there. So it's going to be a while. And when the war first broke out, of course, everybody was talking about it. It was the biggest story in the world. Now, not so many people care anymore. Why? Because it's just become background noise. It's like, oh, yeah, that conflict in Ukraine. It's like, a war in Africa. Like, okay, people just don't really care that much. And the thing is that it's like Crimea. When Russia took Crimea, it was a big story. But then after a while, after years, really almost a decade of Russian-backed proxies fighting Ukrainian soldiers in Donbass, within that decade, people didn't really care anymore. It's like, oh yeah, there's that fighting going on in Donbass. Okay, who cares? So the war in Ukraine has become background noise, and you're beginning to see the reflection of this indifference in Europe, in Poland, in Bulgaria, in Hungary, Slovakia. Also here in the United States. Look at what Trump said recently. Trump stated that if he was in office and there was no end to this war in Ukraine, that in the worst case scenario, he would actually make a negotiation with Putin, and he would allow Russia just to take certain territories in Ukraine. He said that he would allow Russia to take the Russian-speaking territories, so he's obviously talking about eastern Ukraine. And if Trump wins, and it's very likely that he will win, that would also be a reflection that people really don't care so much anymore about this war in Ukraine. So, yeah, there's that. And people in Poland, a lot of people in Poland, I don't think care so much about this war anymore. And I think a lot of people in Poland are very wary of Ukrainian nationalism. There was a story that took place a few days ago in western Ukraine. I think this was in the Lvov region. And there was a little Polish museum in western Ukraine. It was called the Carpathian Cottage. It was a little Polish cultural museum. And it burned down. And they're saying that they don't know who burned it down or what caused the fire. They're saying that the cause of the fire is currently unknown. But this was in western Ukraine. This was in the Lvov region. This fire took place in a region that is extremely nationalistic, very Banderite, very Banderist. This is a high Banderite atmosphere. It's not too crazy to suspect that this could have been a hate crime, that this could have been some Ukrainian Nazi who set fire to it because he hates Polish people and he sees this war in Russia and his love for Bandera is increasing, and his love for Bandera harkens back to the days when Bandera and his thugs and his ilk and those like them were butchering Polish people. So there's that. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.